Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Um, if you have any questions for today, please feel free to add those to the chat box. And remember, we are going to keep our information vague and we will not be giving out personal information about our kiddos' schools or anything like that. But Heather loves all the questions, so please feel free to add those to the Q&A. Without further ado, Heather, it's a pleasure having you today.
Well,
Welcome.
thank you, everybody. And some of you probably were on or scheduled for this, a couple weeks ago, and I had no voice. And I didn't really feel bad, but I was like, I can't get on this call and talk with nothing. So I'm glad that we're here. I'm feeling better. My voice is back. And, I'll probably end up getting sick next week because it's spring break and that's just how life is. I just wanted to share really quickly that before we get started, as Jade mentioned, please oh, thank you. Ask questions, put them in the chat. I'm absolutely love when you unmute your mic and you want to answer a question, but I only ask that you raise your hand if you can, or like the icon, or put it in the chat that I have a question, and I'll just stop us periodically. And please, 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 I am all about confidentiality. So please, keep your questions without like your student's name, what school they go to, what district, because you just never know how information gets out in the world. And I don't want it to be out there for everybody and anybody to hear. So give me a second. I'm going to try to share the screen. I've been doing this for a long time, but I still feel like I'm a newbie every time I do it. So let's try this out. I think I want this one. All right, let's see. Um, that's where I want to be right now is the ocean. That was taken on my cruise this past fall. It was amazing. All right, what can you see? Can you see my opening slide? Courtney, I see you like your face, so I'm just gonna, can you give me a thumbs up? Good, awesome.
Yes.
Um, just making sure that everybody can see what I'm sharing. And Jade is gonna help me with monitoring the chat. So again, if you have questions, put them in there. There will be time for question answers at the end of the session if as well. So today's conversation is all about navigating challenges and resolving conflict, specifically at IEP meetings, 504 conversations. And hopefully by the end of the conversation, I'll give you a couple action items and tools that you can take with you into those meetings with your team to help one, build trust, but also help to build some collaborative that it doesn't have to always be us against them, screaming, yelling, all the things of conflict. So let's talk a little bit about me real quickly. I was a special education teacher in the metro Atlanta area. I spent, well, this says 19 years, but I did spend a little bit of time in Pennsylvania. So I taught here for like 18 years before I became an advocate. I was a middle school special ed teacher. I was an elementary straight general education teacher. I was an instructional support teacher, and I also had the loveliness of earning Teacher of the Year in 2019. And then unfortunately, I decided to leave the classroom, but I was a Teacher of the Year. I do have a master's degree in learning disabilities and behavior disorders, and I love behavior. It's just a passion of mine of communication and behavior, and we need to figure out what a kid is telling us. I am also a COPA member. I have also done some training with them, and I've also done rights law multiple times. And if you are not a member of COPA as a parent, I do strongly suggest that you consider joining COPA. I'm not paid by them. I promise I'm not. But they have a lot of parent trainings. You can attend even advocate late nights and get some of the feedback from other advocates and or attorneys for your situations. And I believe the membership is less than $100 a year for a parent. So that might be something to consider for y'all. So here's your first question. If you could put this in the chat or if you want to answer, unmute your mics. On a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your relationship with your school team? 1 meaning it's awful, I don't trust them, it's, always contentious, it's fighting, versus 5, it's amazing, I bring donuts and all the things and we're just, kumbayaing. Where are we at? I'm going to try to see.
Heather, you have a 3 in the chat.
Okay. 2.
A
Okay.
2.
So probably a little bit more contentious Yvonne with a 2.
Another 3.
Another 3. Courtney says 4. That's pretty good. So basically threes around the board. When I do this training, I feel like I get a lot of kind of 3-ish where we're kind of in The middle, I see, Yvonne, you're getting an IE or you're in the process of an IE, and that for sure probably something is contentious with y'all. Um, but threes are pretty average around this time when I do this training. Um, for Yvonne's of the world and the twos, I'm hopeful that maybe you can get some tips out of this. And I'll talk a little bit about IEs at the end if you'd like me to talk about that. We'll get there. All right, why is it not now? It's not going forward. Oh, there we go. All right, so let's talk about what kind of conflicts happen really around IEP tables. Really, and this goes with Yvonne's with the IEE, disagreements with evaluations and or eligibility. So that's a big one. I see it happen not only for students that already have an IEP and they're doing a reevaluation, but with initial IEPs. That maybe we thought that should have been emotional behavior disorder. We should have thought it was SLD, and one of the ones is autism, that they might have a private diagnosis of autism, and then the team comes to the eligibility table and says they don't meet criteria for autism. And a parent is going, "What do you mean they don't meet criteria for autism? Because they have this medical diagnosis of autism. Where's the discrepancy?" So that can be a point of conflict. Um, dis- Differences in understanding the child's needs and abilities. So you as a parent, you get to see your child at home and you see them doing all these things. And then at school, you get to a meeting and they're like, well, we've never seen them add or subtract or interact with a kid. And it's just completely different sides of the table. You're like, what do you mean? You don't, this doesn't even sound like my child. Disputes over placement and services. So maybe you're looking for maybe a one-on-one aid for your child, and the school team is saying, well, we don't need that level of support. Or they're thinking they need a self-contained autism classroom or an intellectual disability classroom, and you're saying, no, we want them with the typical neurotypical kids. That breeds conflict. Data collection. This happens to me all the time. I'll be honest, most of my meetings, we have deep, deep, deep conversations about data collection and conflict about that because data collection is the foundation of how we are going to support a child. What does the data say this child requires and what they need? What accommodations do they need? What kind of supports and services do they need? What kind of accommodations or modifications? And if you're not taking the data correctly, then that data really is invalid. Behavior data. How are we expecting a child to make progress with behavior or anything with that if we're not actually taking it or implementing it with fidelity? So that's one of the biggest points that I see a lot of the times with families is they get progress reports, but they don't know what it means. They're like, okay, they're making progress. And then when we ask for the data, then I'm like, wait a minute. You didn't even take the data on the right information. Another point of conflict is bullying and disciplinary issues. Kids are being bullied, you're sharing it with the school team and they're not doing anything about it, or they're being disciplined informally or with ISS or out of school suspensions. That breeds conflict. Another one is lack of communication and trust. I'll be honest with you, most families come to me because of some form of communication breakdown. The school team said they were going to do something and they didn't do it, or they said they weren't going to do something and then they did it, or they were going to look into the bullying accusations and then never followed up. I always would tell, even when I was in a classroom, when I was a mentor to newbie teachers, is I would always tell families and my students, don't overpromise and underdeliver. So if you tell a parent you're going to email them on Friday, every Friday at 5 o'clock, then you better bet you that you should make sure that that email is sent at 5 o'clock on Friday. Because if you have a history of not doing it and following through, then again, that breeds distrust, and the team is not going, your families are not going to trust you if you are not sharing that. And also as a family, if you're going to tell a teacher you're going to get, you know, I'll send you this data, make sure that you're following through with that so that the school team is not waiting for you. Do we have any questions about this or anything stick to this, or is there conflict that I haven't mentioned that maybe you'd like to share with your school team with us? I try to hit everything, but I know that we have lots of conflicts going on. Oh, I see somebody. Oh, no, Paula says a 4. Oh, hi, Paul. It's good to, I think you must have came in a little bit later. Good to see you. So, if you're not wanting to share about different conflicts, let's talk about how we potentially resolve those conflicts through collaboration. Well, and I hear this all the time, Heather. You can't collaborate at the IEP table. You shouldn't be collaborating at the IEP table. I'm going to tell you what happens. I was in, I'm always in meetings, but we can collaborate at the IEP table without screaming and yelling. I was in meetings, and I'm always in meetings where the school team is saying something and the parent is disagreeing, and we respectfully say, I respectfully disagree with you, and this is why. You don't have to scream and yell to get your point across. It can be done collaboratively. So, why should we be looking at collaboration? It builds trust and understanding between both parties, between the school and parents. Now, sometimes school teams are not as collaborative and they might come with the I'm gonna fight, right? If you keep your composure, then it's harder for them to keep flaming, building that flame, right? So if you're trying to just keep your emotions in control, and I get it, it is hard as being moms and dads at the IEP table, you're emotional. I understand that. You're hearing things that the school team doesn't want to do, or maybe that you're disagreeing with it, and it's hard to take that emotionality out of it. I also tell families make sure that you bring somebody to a table with you. While you don't have to have an advocate, you can have a family friend, you can have your husband, your spouse, your friend, your neighbor, your mother-in-law, whoever it is, that person can be there to help keep you kind of on the even keel. Give them a task, give them your list of topics that you want to talk about and make them kind of hold you accountable for this is the agenda that I wanted to bring up. If you need to in that meeting, take a pause. If you feel your emotions are getting the best of you, it is absolutely okay to say, I need a break. Can we take a 5-minute break and stop the meeting? It absolutely is okay. It also allows for creative problem solving. So sometimes the answer isn't always as clear as what you think it's going to be. Sometimes you think, oh, if the child just had an FBA and a BIP, then their behavior will be better. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. Or if it's, I'm having a hard time getting my child to be able to add numbers. We've tried XYZ. Well, if we come to the table with collaboration, then we can also think, well, this is what's working at home or with the private tutor or what we've seen to helpful. So then we're both back and forth trying to share strategies that work. We can also, with collaboration, develop skills for future issues. So if you can try to build that collaboration when major issues come up, maybe again, dispute over eligibility or a placement, then you might have some more ground to share and collaborate at the table and think outside the box instead of it has to be just this or that. So, for example, I was in a meeting with a client of mine in Kentucky, and the school district wanted to remove this child from a general education class into a behavior support class. Like they emailed the parent on Thursday and they said, we're having a meeting on a Monday and we want to move this child. Now, back up a little bit. The child has never had a functional behavioral assessment. He's there is not data being taken, or at least that the parent didn't see. So we had to slow down the process and come to the table and say, we're not switching this child's placement drastically from all inclusion to separate class without having the data. So in that meeting, we were able to make some collaborative resolutions where the school team and the family was happy to make a compromise that worked for both of them, all while collecting the FBA data to really make sure that the strategies and supports that were being implemented for this child were appropriate. So again, it's coming to make sure back to that data component that we need to make sure that we are taking and utilizing that data appropriately. It also models collaboration or cooperation for your student and your child. So not every child comes to IEP meetings. I do recommend, and I love when they can come to a meeting, at least for a little bit to share, what's going on. Obviously you're young pre-K, kindergarten kids are not going to be able to share as much as maybe your high school senior. However, they might be able to share something that's positive. If they've brought, what they like about school, who's their favorite teacher, what's their favorite subject. That gives some input because I'll be honest with you, it is more impactful when a student can come to the meeting to share what's good with their days, what's not working, than it is to come either from myself or you as a mom or a dad. And then it avoids escalation for formal disputes. And unfortunately, that does happen sometimes, is that even if you are trying to be collaborative, you will have to go to your formal disputes. And we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. Um, but sometimes it avoids it, sometimes it doesn't, and people dig their heels in, and it's hard to avoid. But we'll try to talk about that. Questions so far? Oh, yes, their data is different at the behavior at home. Absolutely, Yvonne. Yes. So it's very hard to show, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but it all should come back to that data. Build your body of evidence. If you are coming to the table and asking for a one-on-one paraprofessional, don't just come at it with no data to support why you're making that request. Making sure if you're going to ask for an oral reading accommodation, why does your child require that accommodation? Show the data, not necessarily data that you've gotten on goals and objectives, but how they're working at home. Or if you're seeing that they're having a hard time following multi-step directions, life as parents, you are doing multi-step directions all the time. Even in the morning, they have to get up, they have to change their clothes, bathroom routine. That's data that you can share with the school team. How many prompts did you have to give? What kind of schedules do you have to give? Visual schedules. That data is important, and part of your rights as a parent is to be able to share that information and, again, participate meaningfully as an equal member. So they have to consider that information as well. And I just saw somebody write something in the chat, so I want to make sure I get that. As a team, they'll say, we need more time to look into this. Yep, we need to check for the validity of how the data is being collected. Yes. Yes, I see that all the time as well, is that they want to dodge questions about it. And I'm not opposed to putting a pin in it sometimes, right? There are things that we need to address now, but there are things that I'm like, okay, let's take some data on this specific accommodation and then we can come back if we're going to use it. But if the data is there to support whatever you're asking for, then we need to make the decision. And I would tell you, Courtney, if they're talking about that respectful, that you would say respectfully, I'm disagreeing, we can determine eligibility today. We can, make the data work for us. I was in an eligibility meeting a couple months ago, and I guess it was towards the start of the school year. And this child had already been through a lot of the evaluation process and supports the previous school year. And we got around the table, we did all the meeting. We get to the eligibility part at the very end, and the assistant principal says, I think we need some more time to collect data to determine if there is an educational impact. And I'm going to tell you, we sat at that meeting for over an hour and a half, talking about this child being in the counseling suite, not being able to get out of the parent's car, the anxiety. And I looked at her respectfully and said, I respectfully disagree with you. We have all shared all this information about how this is impacting her on a daily basis. We're not just going to wait and see at this point. Now, was I frustrated that she said that? Absolutely, but I wasn't going to let that show all over my face because I got to hold the composure. And I will tell you that the guidance counselor at the school that was supporting her looked across she was looking at me, but she was talking with her neighbor and she was like, I think we do have enough data. And she was whispering, and I looked at her and I said, well, please speak up. And it worked out in our favor. We determined her eligible, this student eligible, and it worked out. Now, it doesn't always happen, but it did in this case, is use that data to support, bring your data to the table. What kind of private counseling are they in? If they're in tutoring, if they're in like a social skills group, what are they working on in there? What kind of data do you have? You have a lot of data, even if you're not thinking that you have a lot of data. Keep a notebook that, because I'm bad about this. If I think of something, I need to put it on my calendar, or if it doesn't exist. So, oh, I'll get to that later, and then I forget. So if you have an instance where you were out at the playground and there was an opportunity for social interaction with another child and your child was struggling with that and you needed to intervene, just write it down, put it on your notes app on your phone and just say, this is, this is how I helped. This is the environment that we were in. This is the supports that were required. So that if you are coming back to the IEP table and you want to ask for, support during recess for social skills or ask for a social skills group, then you have that data that you can present to the team and it's not just one-sided. Um, and I think somebody else put in the chat. Do I need to? Sorry, I'm trying to monitor the chat, even though I told told Jade that she would monitor it.
It's
And
okay. You do have two questions, but I was just waiting on you to take a break. Would you like
okay,
the questions now, or do you
yeah,
want?
I'll take a break.
Yeah.
We're good. Yep.
Okay. So, Yvonne said yes, their data is different at the behavior at home, and then Courtney
Mhm.
said conflict source is the team dodging questions or requests from the parents. They'll say, "We need more time to look at this," or "We need time to check the validity of
Validity.
how the data is being collected." And then Yvonne said yes, but when the school said it doesn't matter because the school wants to remove services and everything at the school is fine, but this is not true. Like an accident at the school, for example, you have to take a decision and not agree with them.
Well, and you do not, when you're disagreeing with a school team, make sure that you disagree formally. Make sure you say, I disagree with X, Y, and Z. Because if you don't verbally say, I disagree, then your non speaking is an agreement. Make sure that you say, I formally disagree. Because, and also make sure that when you get the updated drafts or a finalized IEP, that you go back and look at the minutes or even in the eligibility report, make sure that it says parent disagreed. Because a lot of times what I will see is school teams will write in there, the team came to a consensus and we agreed on X, Y, and Z. When that wasn't the case, it could have been you as a parent saying, no, I disagree. There is a point or a piece on the eligibility components where you have to check yes or no, whether you agree or disagree. Don't just check yes if you agree. If you agree, they're going to implement that IEP and or eligibility without any further, conversation. Make sure that you say no, check no. Checking no doesn't mean that the process stops. You are able to use your dispute resolution options. There are, like Yvonne, you're in the IE process and you can absolutely request that with the school team as well. But I also want to make sure that you know your rights when it comes to that. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But thank you for your questions and keep going with it. And Yvonne, it sounds like you've gone through a little bit to get to this point and the conflict is high at this point with them. And I'm so sorry to hear that. Makes me sad. But it also is why I got into this role is I wanted to be able to help families. So now let's talk through, we already talked about that. Sorry. Let's talk about how we can resolve the conflict through collaboration. And when I meet with my families for the first time and we do the consultation, I always tell my families that I am an assertive advocate and I'm not an aggressive advocate. So I'd really like to take a moment to talk about what that means in my world. So if you're being assertive, you're stating your needs and concerns, but you're doing it in a respectful manner. On the other side, the aggressive person might be blaming somebody, they might attack, they might be screaming and yelling. As a former teacher, I've had both aggressive advocates as well as aggressive families, and it makes me uncomfortable as the teacher, but it just breeds this like anxiety for everybody. Um, an assertive advocate and or you can be assertive by saying I statements that are expressing your desires, wants, and opinions. You're not yelling, you're not condescending, you're not blaming them, you're not using ultimatums. Using I statements puts it on yourself and not feeling blameful. So I understand your concern versus you're not doing just feels different. Again, when you're being assertive, you're listening to other people's perspectives and you're working to find solutions to those conflicts at that point. And I always tell my families we need to try to compromise when needed and picking your battles. So there's things that maybe you want to make sure that we accomplish versus these are less important right now. Um, Keep in mind that there might be a whole lot of things that need to be fixed about your child's education, IEP, behavior intervention plan. There might be a ton of problems, but we can't fix all of those in one meeting. So we need to prioritize when we're going into a meeting. What does that look like? What's the end goal? Is it to talk about data? Is it to request an evaluation? What is the importance right now? And we might need to have 2 or 3 meetings, but it can't be and shouldn't be just a time where we complain about everything. Some language that you can use as an assertive person could be, I understand your concern, but I believe my child also needs more speech therapy and insert whatever that is in there, more OT to address his communication difficulties as it relates to problem solving with peers based on XYZ data. Bring the data. Don't just make the request without being able to back it up. If you're more aggressive, then you might say something like, your school is clearly not capable of addressing my child's needs. I will take this to the district if I have to. That sounds like an ultimatum and a scare tactic, which puts people on the defensive. I'm not saying that it doesn't need to happen like that sometimes, but you are going to get further if you can try to use that assertive approach versus the aggressive approach. I always try to encourage my clients to ask, help me to understand. Would the team consider? Please clarify. I have a different perspective. I hear what you're saying, but I respectfully disagree with you because whatever that is. Again, keep it focused on the data. Data from your house, data from private therapists, data that the school team has shared. Those informal conversations at the drop-off line could be used as data collection. The, you know, oh my gosh, I'm saying, I think it's Class Dojo. Those conversations, the informal phone calls, make sure that you're keeping that because that could be data that is used to help support your request for whatever you're making. And even data from the community, and that's what I had shared just a little bit ago. But if you're out on the playground with your child or at the park or even with family members, even this week with or this upcoming week with spring break, you might be doing some things that maybe you wouldn't be doing typically, and it could give you really good insight about how your child is able to generalize skills from like a classroom setting into the home setting into the social setting. Jade, I got to see your hand up. What you got? Do we have questions so
Yes.
far?
Heather, we do have a question. How do you bring up an observation that the goals are not personalized, but rather feel like they're copied and pasted from a checklist? If your child doesn't follow the developmental checklist in order, it feels like they get stuck at a very basic skill that either don't seem important or that they can't do when interested at home or private therapy, but don't do it consistently at school.
I'm gonna reread that because I'm gonna be
Yes,
honest,
please
my
do.
little
Please do.
sometimes I'm good with actually reading it. So give me 1 second. Huh? Night goals are not personalized. Right. So, and Amanda, if you wanted to open up your mic, I just want to make sure. So, are you speaking of that they seem too vague for your child, or that they, like you
Like you
said,
said,
copied and pasted them from a checklist?
yeah, sorry, I'm trying not to be specific like you asked, but it's mainly with the therapy goals that I'm seeing them literally focus on. I'll just be a little specific, like isolating the index finger all year.
Yep.
And
Have we made any progress on that at all?
yes, and like she's doing it. First of all, I don't care about her doing it that way. Like there's other ways to access her AAC, but they're insisting. I don't agree with some of the methods they use, such as like putting a
Mhm.
sock on her hand. Um, Private therapy feels like she's accessing it fine without needing the index finger,
Mhm.
but And like I said, she's starting to do it with all of this pressure, but I'm like, there's so many other important goals she needs for OT that are like basic skills, like, pinch or grasp. And like, why are we so stuck on isolating the index finger? And then speech is kind of a similar thing where they're just like, well, we can't do that until she says these basic words, like the core words, which I get the importance, but getting
Mm-hmm.
her interested and finding things that she's going to be interested in are going to go a lot further, is what we've seen in speech,
Yes.
than, just saying, well, we can't move on this goal until she says, I like consistently at school.
That's really frustrating,
Yeah.
to be
It feels like
honest
a
with you.
checklist, like she has to do A, B, C before she can do D. And
Right.
The PT excuse is, well, she can't use her gait trainer at school until she can stand without max assist, but she does it at private therapy. So,
So, and then my question on those when they were like, well, if she's not doing it, but you obviously have the data to say that she can
yes.
stand, I would want to know, what does it actually look like in that therapy session? What does the environment look like? Is she with other students? Is she one-on-one? Or is it the time of day that you're having PT? Maybe she's tired in the morning, or it's
Mm-hmm.
right after lunch and she's tired from, there's a lot of things that go into that. But I would also go back to, how does this skill help prepare my child for future education, employment, and independent living?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, thinking, you know, with money, I love money. I think we all love money, but I really hate seeing money goals that are, let's count pennies, quarters, dimes, and nickels, right? And I'm like, that's lovely, but when was the last time us as adults actually counted that information? It's more important of a skill that we can. Do you have enough money to buy said item? And obviously, that's not with your PT and OT and speech, but it's coming back to, how can we move her forward? And quite honestly, have they done an interest survey to even help what motivates her? Because some of it could be a motivation factor for her. How is it done in therapy? I'm a little concerned that they're just like forcing her to use an index finger, to be honest with you. I'm like, I, I don't just use my index finger when I'm on my phone or trying to communicate with others, and I am
Right. And
pretty
like,
self-sufficient.
when else do you use it? I'm like, you don't want people going around pointing at each other, right?
Yes.
Like, I'm thinking like buttons on an elevator is the only thing I could really come up with, but it is
Yeah, but
like, we
like I
cannot move
use
her
my phone.
forward until she accomplishes this. And I'm like, on what checklist are you getting
Well,
this
and I
from,
would probably back that up. I would probably back it up and ask them, what data do you have that would say that she has to do it this way? Is there like research that is grounded that a child has to use their index finger to use their device? And I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure that there is, because there's also people that use eye gaze, so they don't require them to use their hands. You can use your thumbs. Again, I would bring it back to, how is this moving my child forward? And we've been using, it sounds like she's probably had the same goals for years. I mean, I'm just making an assumption. Um, and I'm not saying to not encourage her to do that, but wouldn't it be more important and impactful for her to communicate than however she's going to communicate, than just focusing on a index finger pointing on the graph? So I would always tie it to that. Like, we need to think outside the box here. Why are we still focusing on an index finger? Why are we not working on, holding a pencil? Just because she has an AAC device now doesn't mean that she doesn't and won't be able to use, a writing utensil at some point, or cut. I don't know. Again, I don't want you to share your child's, specific needs, but we need to focus it on that future component. She can communicate. Use that data from your private PT. Does your private PT ever share any reports or observations with the school team, Amanda?
Yes, they have done some collaboration and it it did not go well. Like the private
Mm.
therapists were very frustrated with how insistent these therapists were on their, you know, opinions, which is really all it is, because especially when it came, we did a lot of deep dive on the isolating index finger, and like they
Mhm.
they tried to like talk to the head of their OT department and like Do you see this being a super important need? Like, are we missing something? And then kind of my other question was like, at what point does a goal need to just be terminated? Like, how long is too long to be working on something before we're like, okay, clearly this is just not important? I don't know how to bring that up. Is like asking for a semester too short?
Yeah, so I would be working on a semester. Um, I mean, I would question, is it been a history of that same skill? So like, have we been working on it for a year and now we're at the next IEP meeting and the same goal and objective is in the IEP? Um, because they do have a year to make progress on a goal and objective for sure. Um, but if you're getting all of these, like the progress reports are going to be very important for y'all to make sure that you're getting those, and please make sure that you get them. Um, the school team will tell you or not tell you that you can ask for the raw data that goes along with those goals and objectives, but you absolutely can request the raw data. And what I mean by raw data is, I was a former math teacher, so I'm just going to go with math. But if your child has a math goal for one-to-one correspondence, then they should be able to give you the worksheet or the a picture of how they were taking that data. It's because that's important to see how they're making progress. But if you've seen one progress report or two progress reports like a semester where they're not showing progress, then I would probably call a meeting and the question would be, I am concerned that she's, I think you said you have a daughter or you've
Yes.
mentioned she is her pronoun, uh, that she is not making progress and that she doesn't have the prerequisite skill to be able to do this goal and objective or to do this skill. So do we need to back this up because she's not making progress? Now, I have a couple clients that have the same goals year after year after year. And sometimes I'm not in the meetings, like I've just been brought onto the table and I'm like, why have we been doing the same goal for 3 years? Like, have we have we looked at doing prerequisite skills? So like if they're probably, there's not a timeline that fits all, like one size fits all for that. But I would say if your child is not showing progress on a goal and objective in a year, then I would definitely consider asking the question of the team, do they have the prerequisite skill to be able to access this goal or this skill? And then we have to talk about what's before that. So, like, if we're asking a child to read, do they even know what the letters of the alphabet are? Do they know a difference between a vowel and a consonant? Because they're not going to be able to memorize or memorize sight words or start reading CVC words if they can't do the prerequisite skills for that. So sometimes our goals are too lofty and we have to use that data. Amanda, did that answer your question? If not, I can
Yes,
answer
thank you.
more. Perfect. Um, do we have any other questions about that right now? I think I got off topic, which is fine. I love it. But any other questions right now before I go move on? All right. So I'm going to keep going then, and how we can work together. We can bring your concerns to the IEP team ahead of the meeting. So part of the IEP is parent concerns section. Um, I support my families in writing parent input and sending it at least 7 to 10 days before a meeting. You need to formally write that in writing. Keep in mind, if it didn't happen in writing, then unfortunately it doesn't exist. So make sure that you're bringing your concerns to the table prior to the meeting so the team can have a good discussion about what that looks like. Um, when I was a teacher, I was not great at this, but now I know better, I do better, all the things. So I got in the habit in a lot of our districts, send one sheet and it says, tell me about your child. And they ask like just very standard questions. What's any questions that you have? What's been working? Is there any data that you'd like to see? But it doesn't really go into all the nitty gritty. Some teams don't even ask you that beforehand. They'll just ask you in the meeting. And if you're like all of myself, but also all of my other clients, when you get in that meeting, it's overwhelming and you're not sure what to say in those meetings when somebody says, well, what's your concerns? And then you start, maybe you do have a couple concerns, but you forgot the third and the fourth thing that you wanted to have a concern about. So it's really important to share that ahead of time. It also helps to identify shared goals and interests. It focuses on students' needs. You're also trying to prioritize your concerns. Um, You're separating people from the problem. So it's not personal. It feels personal, but it's not. You need to be working with your team, and it's not personal. You're not asking them to clarify the data because you think that Miss Smith isn't doing her job. I mean, maybe you are, but keep it very data focused and keep it, this is the focus, is my student. You also want to make sure that you're gathering records and documenting any issues. Bringing an advocate or somebody with you to the meeting is extremely helpful to help keep you on track, but also keep the team focused on your child. And I also recommend that anytime you have a conversation, that you follow up in writing. So again, if you're in the carpool line and your child's teacher comes out and says, you know, Sam had a rough day today, he was doing XYZ, and this is the strategy that we're using. Are you okay with that? When you get home, send a follow-up email to the teacher. Hi, Miss Smith, it was great talking with you in the carpool line. This is what I understood the conversation to be. If I misunderstood something, please let me know. That way, you have a record of what was said or what wasn't said or what was agreed upon, even informally. Because again, if it didn't happen in writing, it didn't exist. It avoids the he said, she said. Um, some other information for you all is that if you weren't aware, Georgia is a one-party consent state. And what that means is that as long as you or somebody at the table knows that you're recording the meeting, then you don't necessarily have to inform the districts and you can record. I highly recommend that you don't not tell them that you're recording. It breeds distrust and it just can be very apprehensive. But I do suggest that you record meetings. You need to tell them ahead of time. So when you're submitting that parent input, or if you're asking for a meeting, that you just tell them that you are planning to record this meeting and all subsequent meetings for said child. That way they know ahead of time that you're going to record. Why is it important to record? Again, it avoids he said, she said. Um, it also makes sure that there is a record of the conversation, agreements, disagreements, and action items. When you're at a meeting and you're overwhelmed and there's a lot of information, and maybe the meeting's going, maybe the meeting's going well, but there's just been a lot of conversation and sidebar conversations, and you're like, what did we say? Did we say to do this? Is this how the goal is supposed to be written? Then the recording can be used as, what is that documentation? Um, I know for myself, I recommend to my families that we do record, because even for myself, I'm trained. I like being in meetings. I've been in hundreds and hundreds of IEP meetings, but it's hard for me to advocate, ask questions, and take notes all at the same time. So that's why I like to record. Let's just put it on the recording. I wish all school teams would record meetings, um, just to make sure that everybody is held accountable as well. Keep in mind that meeting minutes are not formally required by IDEA, the law that governs special education, but it is best practice to have documentation about what happens at a meeting. That's also why I highly suggest an audio recording, because it truly is the only way to fully capture the discussion that was had, especially if you have to get a prior written notice or there were disagreements at the table. I've read so many IEPs where it's meeting minutes that said we talked about placement, we talked about ESY, but there was never a discussion. And then when I'm asking the family, they're like, yeah, we had a really good discussion about ESY, about why my child didn't require it or why they did require it, but none of that was actually captured. So one of my top recommendations to y'all is record your meetings. It's not confrontational. You just need to let the school team know that you're recording ahead of time. And it really is the only way to make sure that the conversation is documented. And then you can go back and listen to it, because again, you're like, do we even talk about this or that? It's the only way. Questions you had so far? Does anybody record their meetings in here? Or have they recorded meetings before? Well, I hope you do. If you don't take anything else out of this meeting, is I would highly recommend recording meetings. So how do we resolve the specific issues or conflicts that come to a table? Again, disputes over eligibility, placement, and services, we can be compromising or finding middle ground. We can also get in a second opinion or an evaluation. And Yvonne had mentioned that they're under an IEE. That is that second opinion. So be careful with requesting an IEE. I put the caveat on there that make sure that you have the data to back that up, because the school team, once you request an IEE from the district, that means that they are going to privately fund an independent educational evaluation for your child. They either have two options. You either have the option where they agree to the IEE, or they disagree with the request. If they say, no, we're going to deny your request for an IEE, the district is required to file due process to support and show that their evaluation, was sufficient. So be very careful to not request an IEE before you know what you're going to request and why you're requesting it and using that data, because I don't want you to get in a position where you haven't built your case and then the district says no, but then they file due process on you. And unfortunately, with the due process, you would have to have an attorney, or I mean, you could do it by yourself, but they're going to bring attorneys to the table typically if they're filing due process. And I would recommend that you have an attorney present as well if they're bringing an attorney to the meeting.
Heather, we do have a comment that no, mom does not typically record, but she will be from now on.
Absolutely. I hope that it helps you in that, and it just, you just never know what people are going to say. Or it's if you need that information later on in, your child's history. But make sure with that IEE that you know why, and using data to back up why you're asking for that, because I don't want you to get into a point where you're um, heading into court and you're not exactly sure what's happening. And it's best to, maybe work with an advocate that can help support you at that point, or even do some consultations with special education attorneys if you feel that that's where you're going, just to make sure that you have your ducks in a row and all of your paper trails needed so that it doesn't get denied. Again, when you're disagreeing with parts of the IEP, you should be prioritizing concerns and again, picking your battles. You can propose alternative solutions. So you might say, I disagree with this, but here's my solution. Here is my problem. Here is the solution. Now, they might not agree with all of your solutions, but you brought to the table things that they can consider for you. Also, make sure that if you are formally making a request of something, so if you are making a formal request for more speech and language service time for your child and the district denies that request, you need to make sure that you're asking for a prior written notice and formally saying, I'm going to give you some language. My understanding is that the district has denied my request for additional speech service time. I'm formally disagreeing and would like it to be documented in the IEP meeting minutes, and I respectfully request a prior written notice outlining the district's denial. So sometimes then they'll backtrack a little bit because they don't want to necessarily put it in a formal document that says why they're denying it. So you might end up getting a little bit more of what that looks like. Um, but again, ask for that prior written notice, make sure that it's formally documented. Again, if you're recording the minutes or recording the meeting, then you have it on record that you formally requested it and you're moving on. I would also suggest, and I tell families, that if we've made a formal request ahead of time or you've met it at the meeting and the district is denying it, ask for the request. Let's talk about it as a team. If they disagree or deny that request, ask the team to reconsider based on XYZ data. And if they still deny the request, then you can ask them for a prior written notice and then stop the conversation about that and move on to the next skill or next concern. It is very unlikely that if you keep going and beating around the bush of the same denial, that it will change the outcome. Put it in writing, ask them to write a prior written notice for their denial and what data they used to make that denial, and then move on. And then then you can use your formal dispute resolutions, or, have an advocate or hire an attorney or things like that. You can also get things done without having formal disputes. So sometimes you can meet informally with staff to discuss the issues. This might be that you have an informal conversation with the director of special education or the lead OT. Again, if you have that conversation over the phone or even on a Zoom call like this, then follow it up in writing. That sometimes allows for the school team to do some of their investigations or getting some of their own data and then having that conversation formally. You're always able to request an IEP meeting, so it doesn't have to happen just once a year. It is required that you have an IEP meeting once a year, but you can have a meeting 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, whatever that looks like to make sure that your concerns are addressed. You can also request a meeting with the district staff. So you don't have to wait for the director of special education to reach out to you. You can reach out to them and request that meeting. Again, you want to make sure that when you're coming to those meetings with the higher district staff, that you're coming with a problem and a possible solution, making sure that the school teams kind of know where you're coming from, but also that there is a solution, that you're not just there to complain about whatever district staff or what protocols they're doing. Do I have a question in the chat, Jade?
Yes, one of the questions is what is next after the IEE? After that, my kids have an additional diagnosis, which was under autism, but they removed their services after the evaluation. Now the reevaluation shows that they need to also have ADHD. So what is the chance to set her IEP back into place?
So, Vaughn, let me make sure that I understand. So,
Yes.
you're in the process of an IEE right now, right?
Yvonne, if you would like to unmute or type in the chat, Heather can answer your question.
Is your IEE completed, meaning the private provider finished their evaluation already and it came with additional diagnoses? Sorry. Vaughn, I don't see I think your mic is unmuted, but I can't hear you. Okay. Yes. So your evaluation is done. The private evaluator has diagnosed now additional eligibility, or not eligibilities, but have additional diagnoses. So the school team, and keep in mind with IEEs, they are a private evaluation, which means the school team really only has to consider that information. So even if you're granted an IEE, and Yvonne, I know that you have already been granted, they're in the process, the school team only has to consider that. But what that means for you is I would bring that evaluation to the school team, and you're going to have a reevaluation meeting to discuss that new information. So maybe they diagnosed autism and they maybe diagnosed ADHD. It sounds like ADHD is also on there, that you can consider adding other health impairment. ADHD falls under that other health impairment eligibility in the state of Georgia. To reconsider different eligibility categories. And then they would look at the eligibility guidelines from the state of Georgia. And you can find those if you go to the Georgia Department of Education and you look up eligibility criteria. It'll give you all of the criteria for all of the 13 eligibility categories. Um, if you also have your own data about how they are impacted educationally with their autism and or ADHD, that is also helpful to bring to the table. But keep in mind that just because an eligibility isn't shown on the document doesn't mean that they can't get supports for ADHD. So even if the team says, no, we don't believe that they meet criteria for other health impairment, it's not that that ADHD is going to go away. But if you can tie how their ADHD impacts them educationally, meaning they have a hard time focus, they can't, they're fidgeting in class, maybe they're very impulsive, then you want to tie that into that's how their ADHD presents in school, and that's why we need supports and services to support the ADHD. But keep in mind, again, going back to once the door for special education is open, supports and services can be implemented in an IEP as long as they're an educational need. Did that answer your question, Yvonne? And it honestly, I guess if they're still pushing back, if it's just you, and I'm not sure if you have an advocate or if you have an attorney that is supporting you, if they are continuing to push back on you as a mom, then it might be worth reaching out to somebody that could help you build that body of evidence so you don't feel like you are not being heard at a table. So let's move on to the types of conflict resolution that you have as a parent. So at each IEP meeting, and probably before, you are offered your parental rights. And it's going to be important that you read those and try to understand them as much as possible. But that document outlines what your rights are if you have dispute resolution issues, if you have conflict and you can't seem to figure it out at the table. One is you can, in Georgia, you can request a state facilitated IEP meeting, and the facilitator is a third party that is for the Georgia Department of Education, and they come to the meeting as truly a third party. They are not there to support the school. They're not there to really support you as a mom or a dad or a family. They are there to help get some common ground at a meeting. I've had some success. I've had a couple meetings that were facilitated when I was a teacher. I've had a couple that were good, and I've had a couple that were not so good. But this is one way that maybe financially you're not able to afford an attorney or an advocate, that the facilitated IEP meeting might be something that you want to consider. You just need to make that request of your school district or your school team, and they will submit all the paperwork and all the things, and a facilitator would attend your meeting with you. And typically, the facilitator will reach out to you as the parent to talk with you about what your concerns are. That was my understanding of it before. I don't know that they reach out to the district, but they definitely reach out to you as a family so you can have that conversation. If you don't want to go the facilitated meeting route, you can request mediation with the district. Keep in mind that if you are requesting mediation with the district also has to agree to go to mediation. You both have to go agree again to mediation. It is focusing on finding a resolution with disagreements and working towards a solution. It is free of charge. You do not have to have an attorney present. Advocates can attend mediation if you want them to attend mediation with you. And if you are looking at hiring advocates or an advocate, I would ask them if they've ever been to mediation, just so you know what that looks like. Mediation can happen in person. Oh, sorry, guys. Hit the button. Mediation can happen virtually or in person. I have attended mediation virtually, and what happens is very similar to this Zoom call, is that we have a centralized location to start, and then we break off into school district in one little breakout room, and parents and myself were in another breakout room, and the mediator would hop between both breakout rooms, and then we would then come back together, and if we were able to get through mediation and have a resolution, then we would get there. A second or a third option for you is filing a state complaint. Again, this is why it's important for you to have the paper trail, the audio recordings, and the data to back up everything, because you don't want to just make a state complaint for meaningful participation at the IEP table and you don't have the data to back it up. Make sure that you have the data to support while you're filing that state complaint about the violations for IDEA. You can file a state complaint and go through mediation at the same time. Absolutely can do so. Sometimes, if you can make things work in mediation, then you could consider dropping the state complaint. That's up to you as a family to decide, which option you want to take. But you can do both. Advocates can file state complaints, attorneys can file state complaints, parents can file state complaints at any time. But you don't need either of them to file that state complaint. But there is a lot of nuances, and you would probably want to make sure that you had a professional looking over that state complaint if you were going to file it independently, to make sure that there is enough evidence for the state to investigate the claims that you're putting on the district. And then the last formal dispute resolution is the due process. And this is, again, where you're going to probably go to court with the district. You're filing a lawsuit against the district. Um, I probably wouldn't jump just straight to due process, but it's possible. Like I said, you don't need an attorney, but the district is going to have their attorneys present most likely and probably talk some legal jargon at you. And you want to make sure that you're set up. So I would recommend that you have an attorney present with you. Advocates are not permitted to attend due process in the state of Georgia. In certain states, and I don't know all of the state procedurals about that, but I think in California, advocates can attend due process hearings. I believe in Texas, it's also that advocates can attend due process, but in Georgia, advocates are not permitted to attend due process. So either you go by yourself and have it with you and your family, or you have a lawyer. And due process can be expensive. It is a legal proceeding with a lawyer, and you are probably able to get your legal fees paid for if depending on if you win the due process hearing. But I would say due process is probably a last resort. Make sure that you're doing all the other types of dispute resolutions before you get to due process. Jade, are they going to get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can email that PowerPoint to any of the attendees as well as it will be available on our recorded workshops page.
Okay, I only ask because each of these blue underlined forms and up here it says dispute resolution table is linked to, actually, I better check that because the Department of Education changed all of their websites and links and things like that. I'll make sure that they're done. So when you guys access it, you can have a link to just click on. So you're not having to just file your own things and look it up because the Georgia Department of Education's website can be hard
That
time.
that's
Um,
perfect, Heather. We do have a question if you're ready for
oh,
one.
sure. Let's see what we got.
Is an accident, a fracture accident at school enough to file a state complaint?
Like a child broke their arm.
I believe that's what is she's saying.
So I'm going to say maybe, because how and under what circumstances did they break an arm or a leg or anything? Was their IEP outlined that there was supposed to be a one-on-one para, or they were supposed to have supervision, or there were supposed to be specific accommodations put in place during recess time, or it needs to be very specific. And if it just happened at school, accidents happen. But if you can tie it to the school district where the school team was not following your child's IEP and this was the cause because they didn't do their part, then you might have enough information to file a state complaint. Vaughn, I think I need an advocate. You might. There's just a lot of nuances in with special education, and whether you've been at the table for a lot of years or this is your first time, things change all the time. And I will tell you that even though I started in the education world in 2005, 2004, things have changed, and I'm still learning every day. Acronyms change, the way things handled district to district, school to school. You can go to one school district or one school in one district and go to the same district but a different school and they do things completely different. It can be very frustrating if you're unsure about things. So another suggestion that I bring up to families is if you hear we don't do that here, or we can't let you observe a class placement because it's against confidentiality, ask for the policy. Where's your policy? Show me the policy of why I can't observe. What's the district's policy on that? Because you want to make sure that you know what your rights are, and it's just some keywords. But yes, just make sure that you probably could file a state complaint if you can tie it to the district not following and implementing your child's IEP appropriately. Um, this is the time I'm going to ask about this. I remembered, Jade, about the parental rights and the AI. So Jade and I were chatting right before everybody got on, and we were talking about people hacking and all the things that go on. And AI is huge right now in the special education community and just in general. Um, and sometimes, if you are not sure, like your parental rights, read your parental rights. But there's a lot of education jargon in there that you probably might not understand or not know what it is. And you're like, oh, I'll just put this into AI. I'll put it into Chat GPT, and Chat GPT will give me all of the greatest information in the world. That's lovely, but I also want to caution you that be careful uploading documents into open AI sources like Claude or ChatGPT that are your child's information because they say it's protected, but we know that it really isn't. You don't want your child's name, age, school district, really any identifying information to be uploaded into ChatGPT or any of these open AI programs, and that somebody could get into that. And now they have your whole caseload of your child's IEP and evaluation documents. And some of the information that is in those documents, you probably don't want to share with everybody. Um, so I would be very cautious to you that if you are going to use AI or an open AI source like ChatGPT to help you read through an evaluation report that's hard for you to understand, is that you redact your child's information from that. Take the child's name out, take the child's district out, even identifying information in terms of like what teachers filled that out, because my name's on some evaluation reports, and I could easily go into Google and say, who is Heather Wright? And it could pull up that I taught in Fulton County schools and all the things. And then they could do deductive reasoning to find out which district, what school, what kid this is in. Also, be very careful that if maybe you do have a question, that you're not uploading a report into ChatGPT or a like, that when you are putting a question into ChatGPT, you are being vague. Um, change your child's name, take out the kids, even service providers or private evaluators name, change the pronouns, maybe you have a daughter and you change it to that it's your son. You want to still get the information, but you don't want to put your child's specific information out there. Just you never know. I would hate for y'all computers and programs and chat GPT to get hacked and then your information is out there and things that you don't want to share. So that's just my soapbox on that. I know that that really doesn't have anything to do with conflict resolution, but just it makes me nervous with the generation that we're in right now. Do I have any other chat right now? Questions we got for me? That was a lot of information, but I will make sure that the links are available and working for you guys. Um, I'm going to put this slide up there for you just to see. This is my website information. I do offer a free 30-minute consultation, and you can book a consult with me on my website. You can also download a free concerns letter template that I've created to help you address your concerns with the school team instead of just sending it in an email. You have my email address here, and I am on Facebook and Instagram at Heather Wright Consultant. So you can follow me there if you'd like. I thought I saw a hand raised, but I could be wrong about that.
Um, Heather, we've had some thank yous in the chat,
Oh,
which is it's so on point. Like we really can't thank you enough for walking us through all this information. It's wonderful, and we love having people tell us things that we need to do as parents because this is not something that someone just sat down and walked us through one day. So all your information is so perfect. And we
that's
had
awesome.
another thank you in the chat box as well. But is there anyone else that has a burning question for Heather while we have her time right now um, to
And
ask
I'll make
and get
sure
her
too,
input?
Jade, that the slideshow, um, that the PowerPoint has the links, but also my notes on there that has like the specific wording that we can use for the parents as well. Because again, I know that it's a lot.
Perfect. Yes, that's perfect. So yeah, if anyone has any burning questions while we have Heather sitting here, giving us her wonderful time, please unmute and feel free to ask.
Please do. I love hearing from y'all. Or you just want to tell me what's working with the school team. I don't know. What's working not. Man, I took lots of notes. I love it. But you'll
Yes,
get the PowerPoints too, so make sure that you guys look at those notes because, again, this is why it's important to have the recorded conversation because I talk faster than you can probably type or handwrite. So it's good to have those notes of what the keywords are to use.
Well, Heather,
Awesome.
we're getting more thank yous, which
Thank
is
you. It was
wonderful.
great for you guys. And Jade, for you, thank you for having me on the call today. I love sharing my information with y'all and love supporting families. And this is exactly why I love being an advocate for families now, is
Well,
helping y'all know what to do in the school systems. But thank you, Jade, and everybody that's joined today.
we appreciate you, and we could not do all this without you, Heather. So thank you, and thank you for providing your information for anyone that wants to reach out. And then for anyone that doesn't know, we have other recordings from Heather on our recorded workshops as well, because Heather is so amazing and walks us through what we need to do and action items as parents. So, anytime you want more information from her, please follow her on Instagram. She gives great advice on Instagram too, for those that don't know. But Heather, we appreciate you and thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you guys so much. And for all of you, have a wonderful spring break and try to enjoy being pollen free, maybe. Maybe it'll rain, but enjoy the time with your kids next week. And I hope you guys have found this information useful. And I look forward to hearing from y'all or even booking a consultation with me is great too.
So perfect. Thank you so much, Heather. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.